It begins in silence, a moment so subtle that even the child experiencing it doesn't recognize it as the turning point it truly is. Picture this, a 7-year-old sitting at the kitchen table, watching a parent crumble under the weight of their own demons. Perhaps it's substance abuse, slowly destroying the family from within. Perhaps it's rage that erupts without warning, turning every moment into a minefield. Or maybe it's something even more insidious, the deafening quiet of emotional absence, where a parent exists in body but has vanished in spirit. And in that precise instant, without anyone speaking a single word, something fundamental shifts in that child's psyche. A silent promise forms. If I don't keep this family from falling apart, everything will collapse. And if this resonates with your own story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because we're about to dive deep into healing these wounds together. This is the moment a child ceases to exist as a child. Not in the physical sense, but in every way that truly matters. They don't vanish from the dinner table or stop attending school. Instead, they undergo an invisible metamorphosis. Their smiles become more frequent, more practiced, more deliberate. Their tears dry up, pushed down into a place so deep they forget they ever knew how to cry freely. They develop an almost supernatural ability to gauge the emotional temperature of every room they enter, adjusting their behavior like a chameleon adapts its colors. They transform into the family's emotional regulator, the household thermostat, constantly working to keep everyone else comfortable. They become miniature versions of adults, carrying responsibilities their developing minds were never designed to bear. And here's the truly heartbreaking part. Society rewards them for this premature aging. Teachers marvel at their maturity. Family friends comment on their responsibility. Relatives praise their strength. "You're so grown up for your age," they say with admiration, completely blind to the tragedy unfolding before their eyes. But here's the question nobody thinks to ask, the question that haunts these children into their adult years. What price did they pay for that maturity? What parts of themselves did they sacrifice at the altar of survival? Today, we're exploring the hidden psychology behind children forced into early adulthood. This isn't just another self-help topic or pop psychology trend. This is about understanding a form of trauma so normalized, so culturally accepted, that millions of people carry it without even recognizing they've been wounded. And here's what makes this particularly crucial to understand. These effects don't simply fade when you blow out the candles on your 18th birthday. They don't dissolve when you graduate college or land your first real job. They weave themselves into the very fabric of who you become. They infiltrate your romantic relationships, dictate your career choices, and fundamentally alter your relationship with your own worthiness. And if you never truly grasp what happened to you, you'll spend decades unconsciously repeating the same survival mechanisms that once protected you, but now slowly suffocate the life you're trying to build. Let's examine what's actually occurring on a developmental and neurological level, because understanding the science helps us recognize this isn't weakness or oversensitivity, it's biology. When children find themselves emotionally supporting adults rather than receiving that support themselves, mental health professionals identify this as parentification. It's the inversion of the natural order, where the child becomes the caregiver, the mediator, the counselor, the guardian of everyone's feelings except their own. This goes far beyond merely being unhealthy in some abstract sense. This fundamentally rewires the architecture of the developing brain. When a child consistently assumes responsibility for emotional regulation, whether managing their own turbulent feelings or stabilizing the chaotic emotions of the adults around them, something profound happens neurologically. The brain develops what trauma researchers call hypervigilance, a state of perpetual alertness that never fully switches off. Imagine living in a house where the floors might give way at any moment. You'd walk carefully, testing each step, constantly scanning for signs of danger. This is what happens psychologically. These children learn to tread through life as if navigating a field of landmines. They become experts at reading micro-expressions, detecting subtle shifts in tone, sensing danger before it fully materializes. Through this relentless vigilance, they absorb a devastating lesson about the nature of love itself. Love is conditional, transactional, something that must be earned through service. The unconscious logic becomes crystal clear. If I maintain peace in this household, perhaps I'll receive safety in return. If I manage everyone's emotions skillfully enough, maybe I'll be worthy of protection. Their own needs become classified as dangerous, selfish, even threatening to the family system, while everyone else's needs are treated as emergencies requiring immediate attention. So the authentic child begins to disappear, not from the physical world, but from the emotional landscape. In their place emerges a carefully constructed version designed for maximum functionality and minimum disruption. They become the good child, the one who never causes problems. They become the silent achiever, racking up accomplishments while making sure not to draw too much attention. They become the person everyone confides in, but who never burdens anyone with their own struggles. They become the person who never, ever asks for anything, because asking feels like admitting weakness, like breaking the unspoken contract that keeps everything from falling apart. And this identity becomes so convincing, so thoroughly integrated, that eventually even the person wearing the mask forgets it's not their true face. But beneath this impressive facade, something fundamental aches. There's a persistent pain that feels too vague to name, too complicated to explain, because the inner child who was buried alive didn't actually die. They're still there, trapped inside, screaming questions that never get answered. Why didn't anyone see I was drowning? Why didn't anyone protect me when I was too small to protect myself? Why was everyone else's pain more important than mine? And as these children mature into adolescence and eventually adulthood, the symptoms become increasingly complex and harder to trace back to their origin. Many develop what psychologists call counter-dependent attachment, commonly known as hyper-independence. They reject offers of help almost reflexively. They construct walls around their hearts and call it strength. They push away the very intimacy they desperately crave because somewhere deep in their nervous system, they learned that depending on others leads to disappointment, and disappointment feels too much like the abandonment they've already endured. Some experience emotional numbness during moments that should bring joy. Celebrations feel uncomfortable. Success feels undeserved. Happiness triggers an inexplicable anxiety, as if their nervous system is waiting for the other shoe to drop, because positive emotions were never safe in their formative years. They often struggle with rest in a way that goes beyond typical busyness. Rest feels irresponsible, lazy, even dangerous, because productivity became their primary source of worthiness long ago. The exhausted child learned that being useful meant being lovable, and that equation still runs in the background of their adult operating system. Perhaps most tragically, many don't even recognize they're still operating in survival mode decades later. When dysfunction becomes normalized during those crucial developmental years, the nervous system calibrates itself to chaos. The baseline setting becomes crisis management. Consequently, stillness registers as wrong. Peace triggers suspicion rather than relief. Love feels like a debt that will eventually come due rather than a gift freely given. This is the psychological reality for those forced to grow up before they were ready. It's not simply sadness or melancholy. It's a complex trauma that fundamentally reshapes their worldview and, more devastatingly, how they perceive themselves. You might wonder, why would any child willingly assume such a crushing role? The answer reveals something profound about human attachment. Children will sacrifice almost anything, including their own authentic selves, to maintain connection with their caregivers. This choice isn't conscious or deliberate, it's biological imperative. When safety is absent, The child trades authenticity for belonging, not because they're weak, but because they're intelligent. This is survival instinct operating exactly as designed. But here's the tragedy that defines so many adult lives. The very strategies that saved you as a child now imprison you as an adult. Countless people walk through the world as high-functioning, successful individuals, while internally neglected inner children pull the strings from the shadows. They overachieve to earn love that should never have been conditional. They silence their needs to avoid abandonment they're still terrified of experiencing. They caretake everyone around them while secretly harboring a fantasy, a desperate hope that someone will finally notice they're not as strong as they appear, that perhaps once they'll be granted permission to fall apart.
That fantasy, that longing for someone to see through the performance, that's not your adult self yearning for attention. That's the child who never got to be a child, still waiting for what they deserved all along. The first step toward healing isn't about fixing or improving yourself. It's about witnessing what actually happened. Because until you validate your own experience, you'll continue gaslighting yourself with minimizing thoughts. It wasn't really that bad. Other people survived much worse. I turned out fine. But fine is just another mask, isn't it? And somewhere beneath all those layers of coping mechanisms, you know the truth. So what becomes of these children when they reach adulthood? They become adults who never truly feel safe, even in quiet, stable environments. They become partners who cannot trust tenderness, always waiting for betrayal. They become givers who cannot receive, who feel physically uncomfortable when someone tries to care for them. They become people who apologize for expressing emotion, who flinch when receiving compliments, who mistake exhaustion for achievement and burnout for dedication. This is the true cost of premature aging. When your childhood trained you to prioritize strength over vulnerability, silence over honesty, fixing others over acknowledging your own fractures, what kind of adulthood can you possibly inherit? You inherit a life spent holding your breath, perpetually waiting for someone to grant you permission to finally stop performing and fall apart. But here's the truth that changes everything. No one is coming to rescue the child you buried. You must be the one to go back, to reach through time and hold that child's hand. You must be the one to speak the words no one else ever said. You didn't deserve that treatment. You were just a child doing your best to survive. You're allowed to rest now. This is where genuine shadow work begins, not in toxic positivity or quick fixes, but in turning toward the abandoned parts of yourself and saying clearly, I see you now, I hear you now, and I'm not leaving you behind anymore. This is the reparenting process, and it's brutal in its honesty because it demands you feel the grief you never had time to feel when you were busy holding everyone else together. It requires you to sit with rage, sorrow, and unmet needs that have been waiting decades for acknowledgement. To weep for birthdays where no one showed up emotionally. To mourn the innocence sacrificed while protecting people who should have been protecting you. But that grief, it's not weakness. It's evidence of healing. Because what was once frozen in time is finally beginning to thaw. These survival patterns manifest in adulthood in ways that often look like personality traits rather than trauma responses. You become the therapist in every friendship, but never allow anyone to truly know your pain. You're celebrated for independence while privately terrified of being perceived as needy. You enter relationships where you overfunction, constantly fixing, managing, explaining, then wonder why resentment builds despite your best efforts. You struggle with boundaries because saying no still feels like abandonment, like breaking a sacred contract. These aren't character flaws. They're coping strategies, learned through necessity and repeated through habit. And here's the liberating truth. What was learned can be unlearned. But only when you stop glorifying your strength and start honoring your wounds. One powerful practice, ask your inner child what they needed that they never received. You might hear answers like, I needed someone to tell me it wasn't my responsibility to fix broken adults. I needed someone to ask how I was feeling. I needed permission to play, rest, and laugh without fear of triggering someone else's crisis. Then, gradually, you begin providing those things for yourself, not to erase the past, but to stop unconsciously recreating it. This is how you stop seeking parents in romantic partners. This is how you distinguish between anxiety and intuition. This is how you stop running from the child you were and the person you're becoming. Carl Jung understood this when he wrote about the necessity of facing our shadow selves. Consciousness requires pain. We'll do anything to avoid confronting our own soul. But real healing demands we face all of it. The neglected, ashamed, frightened, angry parts we've kept hidden. Because healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before trauma taught you who to be. If you grew up too fast, understand this. Your maturity was never the problem. The problem was the absence of choice. But now, choice exists. You can choose softness over constant strength. You can choose rest over relentless productivity. You can choose to stop managing everyone else's emotional weather and start honoring your own internal climate. It won't happen overnight. Some days you'll feel like a child again, vulnerable, scared, needing comfort. Good. That's precisely the point. Let that child come home. Let them cry the tears they couldn't cry before. Let them play without purpose. Let them finally be seen and held. Because you're not broken. You're becoming whole. Maybe for the first time, you're growing up the right way, not through pressure or fear, but through truth and self-compassion. You never had a real childhood, but you still have a future. And this time, you're the one writing the story.